Good morning. Last night after the class, I think I realized that I had not recorded the entire class. So what I am trying to do this morning is go back and go over everything that we spent our time talking about last night in the class. Hopefully also, as I do this once again, and perhaps teach this class in a second sense, I will be able to cover everything maybe a little bit more slowly, but also in a way that could be better understood. Last night, what we began to do, because now everybody now has their books as well as their workbooks, I just started going back over the things that we started looking at in Chapter 2 and in Chapter 3 of the workbook. And so again, what I'm going to do is kind of go back over that and then start going on into Chapter 3, where we then begin to talk about verbs and all that's involved in that. So again, thank you for being with me, and appreciate so very, very much your patience, and hope that this will help us both, me to make sure that I'm doing it the way I need to be doing it, and you in a way to where you can understand it even that much more. We began last night with the idea of the words themselves in Lesson 2. We talked about all of the words and we said them. If you look at page 7 of your book, then the verbs were ago, which means I lead, akuo, where we get the word acoustic, and we talked about that a couple of weeks ago, where it says I hear, blepo, which means I see, echo, which means I have, and luo, which means I loose or destroy. And I pointed out the idea that this particular word has a couple of different meanings depending on the context of the sentence and the context of the passage. That's something that we'll always take into consideration as we look at this. Words always have to be understood in their immediate context. If I were to tell you that and use the word store, I am going to the store, you immediately would think about the idea that I'm going to go to a grocery store, Walmart, or someplace like that. But if I, on the other hand, say I am going to store this speaker system, then you will understand that that is a place where I'm going to put something until I'm ready to use it again. Same way in the Greek. The Greek has the same word sometimes using the very same ideas, using the very same word, but it suggests different ideas in the context. So always keep that in mind. That's something that's going to happen. And again, you will see this the more you begin to understand this. If you look at the words on the right-hand side, we pointed out last night, the idea that these words are nouns of what we call the second declension. You have the first declension, the second declension, and the third declension nouns. Most of the nouns of the second declension are what we call masculine nouns. You will always be able to tell what form a noun is, whether it's masculine, feminine, or neuter, by looking at the article at the end of the word. In every one of the paradigms, wherever we have the words as well as the meaning of the words, there will always be, as in this case, angelos, and then you have the word ho. The word ho, he, and to are the article in the masculine, feminine, and neuter declension. So the idea is that this particular word is a word of the second declension, and we also understand that this is a masculine noun. Angelos, and that means angel or messenger. Adelphos, ho, which means, again, brother. You have the word doulos, and we spent a little bit of time talking about that. The idea of being a bondservant, one who owns me, therefore I am his slave, and my job then from that point forward is only to do his will. Karpos, ho, which means fruit, and then logos, ho, which means word. And so those are the words, and again, these are nouns. The vocabulary will always include the definite article with the nouns in order to indicate the gender of the word. And in Chapter 4, we're going to see more about the gender and how all this stuff begins to fit together. Again, we talked a little bit about transliterating. If you're going through your exercises and you're not sure exactly how to pronounce a word, then what you do is you take it, you give its equivalent in the English, and then say it in the English. And again, in the workbook, by Stephen Cox, you will do a lot of transliterating so that you would get in your mind that much more exactly how the word sounds. And the more you say it, then the more, and write it, the more obviously the noun or the word is going to stick in your mind, plus the definition. So it's important for us to, again, keep that in mind. So this will help us in the pronunciation of the Greek. We talked about going on down to 2.3, the breathing marks. The breathing marks determine whether there's a smooth breathing or a rough breathing. I already talked about this once, but again, it's good to go over it again. The smooth breathing looks like a left or single right quotation mark, and the rough breathing looks like a single left quotation mark. I always say it looks like a very little C. Every Greek word that begins with a vowel or a diphthong must have a smooth or a rough breathing. Also, if it is the initial row, it will always have a rough breathing mark. And he gives the example of the word rhema. And again, you hear the rhema, okay? The breathing mark is placed over a single vowel or over the second vowel of the diphthong, as in anthropos. Anthropos means man, or altos. And again, that we will look at that declension a little bit later on, various forms of thee and thou and you. All right? The smooth breathing does not affect the pronunciation of the word, but again, a rough breathing does mean we say a ha, harmatia, ha, rhema. We're saying a H sound to begin it. The punctuation marks, again, I talked about this in the very first class. The comma and period correspond to ours. The colon corresponds to the use of our colon or semicolon, and the semicolon in the English is the question mark. So again, you will find this somewhere down the line. Please don't forget it. The apostrophe serves in the Greek as it does in the English. Whenever a word is deleted, or excuse me, some letters are deleted. I gave the example last night and wrote them on the board, and perhaps that you might catch that part of the video. In fact, what I'm going to do is post both of these videos today so that you will be able to look at what I may have forgotten as well as what I covered again yesterday. But we used the example of cannot, and we contracted that down to the word can't. And of course, as you do that, you would elide or drop the N and the O of the not. So you go from cannot to can't, and you would have an apostrophe mark, which emphasizes the idea that these particular letters have been dropped. That simply means, and that suggests simply what the idea of elision is. Elision is dropping those particular letters. We also talked about crosses, which involves the contraction of vowels or diphthongs at the end of one word and the beginning of another word, causing the merger of two words. So I gave the example of kai ego, which as is in kai ego is and I. The word kai is perhaps the most familiar word in the Greek language because it's the word and ego is, again, a verb form of I, the personal pronoun. So as we look at that, I'm sorry, it is just the personal pronoun. It is not a verb form of the personal pronoun. Please forgive me for that. So as we're looking at this, if you combine kai and ego together, it becomes kago. And again, in that situation, you would have the apostrophe emphasizing the idea that a couple of the letters have been elided or dropped. Another example that they give in the book is kai eki, which means kakai. And then a coronus is placed over a contracted vowel to retain the breathing mark of the second word. And then another word or another thing is a diaeresis, which is placed over the second of two vowels standing together so that the vowels will be pronounced separately. And he gives the example here of 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 17, where he talks about achaia. We understand that that word is achaia. In the Greek, it is akaiaku, akaiaku, akaiaku. So you pronounce the alpha as well as the iota in this particular word. I mentioned last night as well that a Greek word has as many syllables as it has vowels and diphthongs. And this is important as we start beginning to work this out. So the two vowels of a diphthong make one syllable, not two. So you have the word logos. logos. So that's the two syllables there. Now, what's important to remember about this syllabification, if you want to use that particular word, is the fact that this becomes important when it comes to the accent of the Greek word. I mentioned last night, and I will mention again, that one of the biggest struggles I ever had whenever I was taking Greek was learning where to put the accent of the word. The accent is important. If you were to look at, and we do this very quickly, we did this last night at page 6 of your book, you would see the papyrus manuscript of the Greek New Testament, and this is called the Chester Beatty Biblical Papyri. If you will look at that, all the words, number one, are jumbled together because they did not have the paper or anything like that they didn't have that luxury that we have where we literally throw away paper after writing on it. They would write this on papyrus, they would write this on parchment, so no space was wasted. Secondly, if you'll notice, there is no syllabification marks on this. When the Greeks would read this, they would know where the words broke. They would also know exactly how the words would be accented. Just like many times today, as we're reading books, even in this particular book, on page 8, as we're going over this, you'll notice there's no accent marks on the English word. We know where to emphasize the accent marks. We know how to say the words because we've grown up in English. In the same way, they've done that in the Greek. They didn't put any accent marks. We do this, and instructors and teachers do this to emphasize the idea of where to put the accent. And again, this will make a difference. I want to bring out that a little bit later on, we're not going to go there right now, but where the accent is on a word can make the difference in what the meaning of the word is. So we have to be very careful about that. That's part of the reason why I will always stress that as you're reading through this, always, always, always emphasize the word where the accent is, because that will help that, again, to get it in your mind, as well as to help you to perhaps identify the word a little bit later and spell the word later whenever you're actually having to write the Greek in a vocabulary test. What I do in my vocabulary test is not only give you the words in Greek, but also give you English words, and you've got to write the word out in Greek. So just keep that in mind. We have the word adelphos, which means, again, brother. That has 3 syllables, adelphos. And again, the syllable is on the last syllable, or excuse me, the accent is on the last syllable, so it's adelphos, adelphos. Then you have doulos. Here, the syllable has the circumflex, which means it rises in pitch and comes down, doulos, doulos, kind of like that, only you don't really hear it as we say it very quickly, doulos. So it's 2 syllables, and the accent is on the first syllable. Now, again, part of the reason is there's no rule adequately to divide a Greek word into syllables in regard to the consonants. A lot of times if you have double consonants, that's where the word's going to break. Like angelos, the 2 gammas would break into the NG sound. That's what we say, but there's actually a break there to emphasize the syllables. Angelos, adelphos. So, again, didache, didache. So again, the essential point is that the vowel, not the consonants, determine the syllable. In the syllabification, you have the antepenult, the penult, and the ultima. The ultima is the last syllable of every word. The penult is the middle syllable, unless there's a 2-syllable word, and then it's only the penult and the ultima. If there's 3 syllables, there's the antepenult, which means the one before, the penult, and then the ultima. Ultima, just kind of keep that in your mind, is always the last syllable. So, only on these 3 syllables do we receive the accents. Now, as I talked about before, you have the acute accent. The acute accent is able to go all the way back to the penultimate, or of the excuse me, the antepenult, the antepenult. So it's able to go back 3 syllables. The penult is the middle syllable. It could take an acute or a circumflex, and then the grave always set, or the grave always sits on the ultima. That's all. The grave is always usually used on that syllable, and it's usually used at the end of a sentence if the next sentence begins with the vowel. So it's the idea that you're coming down in pitch before you say the next word. So that was what the ideal is, and as you're coming down in the pitch, you're also at the same time stopping for just a moment before you go on to the next word of the next sentence. So always keep that in mind. So again, the acute accent is always the most versatile of the three. The circumflex accent can stand on long syllables. And again, the Graves accent only stands on the ultima, but it could be standing on either long or short syllables. Now, part of the reason why I always had trouble with knowing exactly how to, where to put the syllable was because a lot of times, as we've talked about before, the vowels can be, some of them can be long or short. The alpha, the iota, the epsilon can be a long or a short vowel. And again, what do we mean by long? By how long we say it or how long we drag it out as we say the word. As you continue to say these words, you will begin to realize that there might be just a smidgen, if I could use that word, of how long we hold that particular vowel. But to me, it really didn't make a lot of difference between the length of a long and a short vowel. The alpha and the iota, as I said, as well as the epsilon, could be long or short. The eta and the omega are always long. So as we realize that, that's what makes part of this somewhat hard to understand. Where do you put the syllable if it depends on if it's a long or a short vowel? And so again, that's it. In this particular book that I am using to teach this class, we spent a great deal of time emphasizing the idea that, and this particular book does not go into detail as to where these all should go. If you want to really learn how to put the accent on this, you can go to the back of the book where it does give you these guidelines. Let me suffice it to say that verbs have what we call recessive accent. That means the accent is going to try to go back as far as it can in the verb. In the nouns, the accent will always try to stay at the nominative case. Now, we don't know anything about that right now, but later on you will understand what I'm talking about when it talks about the nominative case. When we have the vocabulary, the word angelos ho, like we've read on page 7, that is the vocabulary. It says an angel. That is the nominative case. So you would find the accent on that particular case, which would be angelos, which would be in the first syllable, the antepenult, angelos. So we understand that all the times, all through there, the accent will try to stay on that syllable. But depending on how the word ends, angelos, agalon, agalus, depending on that particular word and how the ending changes to make the difference in the sentence, then those accents might change somewhere down the line. And again, this was something that was really interesting and extent. As I said, it's something that I never was able to grasp. So I'm not going to put a lot of emphasis on that, other than to say that sometimes with some of these Greek words, the accent, and I just say some, the accent will make a difference in what the word may mean. Let me say that again. The accent sometimes, with words that look exactly the same, the accents will make a difference in what the word may mean. So that's the reason why we want to emphasize this as we go through it. Always be looking where the accent sits. Always be looking for it, how it changes as you go through a particular paradigm, such as angelos or adelphos or some of these others. Look and see where the accent changes as we go through this, and then at the same time, you'll be able to grasp that a little bit more. In 2.8, we deal with some exercises, and we spent some time practicing again how to say these words. So the first word in the pronunciation is lues, lues. Now notice you have the accent on the penult. It's a two-syllable word, lues, lues. Luusen. Now here again, this is a verb, so the accent is going to try to go back as far as it can. Luusen, luusen. But the accent is on the first syllable, so it's luusen. Lambanomen. All right, notice that the accent is not on the fourth syllable because it never will have one. It is on the third syllable, and again, because it's a verb, it will go all the way back to the antepenult. Lambanomen. Say the words with me. Lambanomen. Pharaoh, pharaoh, pharaoh. Okay? Tauta, tauta. Again, remember the owl makes the kraut sound. This diphthong makes the kraut sound. Tauta. Erkomatha, erkomatha, erkomatha. Thanatos, thanatos, thanatos. Doron, doron, doron. Thanatos is the word for death. Doron is gift. So again, as we go through this, lambanomen is I take or I destroy. Again, depending on the context is how the word would be defined. Hirehu, hireu. Okay. He, so you have a rough breathing. Hireu, hireu. So that's the word for temple. Hireu. Irene, irene, irene. Hey Meira, hey Meira. Did you hear the rough sound? Hey Meira, hey Meiron, hey Meiron. Now, I said it wrong, but I was thinking of the first word in that particular declension at that point in time. So it's hey Meiron. But again, it's hey Meira, hey Meiron, all the way through the declension. We'll look at that later. Huios, huios, again, hear the sound because again, it's a rough breathing. Huios, that is the word for son. Hegagon, hegagon. Angalia, 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 angalia. Hagios. This word is the Greek, is the word where we get the word holy, where we get the word saint, where we get the word sanctify. All of these words are talking about that same idea. Context, context, context. The next word is katharizo, katharizo. And again, this suggests the idea of cleansing, cleansing. Poiumen, poiumen, poiumen. And pseudomai, pseudomai, pseudomai. And again, that's where we get the word pseudo, which means false. So pseudomai, there's where we get that idea. Now, as we go back to the workbook for just a few moments, let's look at this, and so we can see, and again, try to get everybody caught up on what's going on there. What I'm trying to try to do is go through the book as well as this, as we go through this. All right, the first chapter is mainly just learning the letters, repeating the letters, and again, learning how to write the letters. We again emphasize the idea on page 2 of the workbook of the 7 Greek vowels. The epsilon and the omicron are always short. The alpha, iota, and upsilon are always long. And the eta and the omega are always long. Excuse me. The alpha, iota, and upsilon can be long or short. So again, remember what I said a few moments ago concerning that. We spent a little bit of time talking about the iota subscript again, where the iota may be placed under the alpha, the eta, or the omega, but it still makes the sound as I, a, and oi. Okay, so keep that in mind. We talked about the consonants, what liquids, mutes, and sibilants are. The liquid consonants are liquid because of the easy flow of breath. The mutes start off with, you close the mouth with the tongue on the palate, the upper part of your mouth, and then slowly release the sound. So blepo, blepo, blepo. We talked about dentals, pronounced with the teeth and the tongue, palatals, pronounced with the back of the throat, and labials. All righty. Sibilants are ones that have the s sound in them. So you have the word sigma, zeta, chi, and psi. Okay. All right. So keep that in mind. So again, all you're doing in that place is emphasize the idea and write those words again, write those letters all the time. Going to point 2 in the workbook. What syllable of the Greek word is to be stressed? It's the syllable on which is the accent. Always, always, always remember that. What is the vowel U of the definite article with the noun in a lexicon or a sentence. This denotes the gender of the noun. We will talk about that in lesson 4. Okay. The true or false, the exact way of which some Greek letters are pronounced in the New Testament is certain. That's false. We use the Erasmus system, which is brought out by the fellow by the name of Erasmus. And that just kind of helps us as we continue to go through here. We've got to also remember this, and I didn't spend a lot of time talking about this, but the Greek actually has two, but before we even emphasize this, let me say it this way. English has what we say important or documentary English, and then you have regular common English, and then you would have even in a third sense the rough English, okay? So if I'm writing a paper, I'm going to use what we say is classical English. I'm going to use proper words in every situation. If I'm talking like I talk now, and again, I grew up in Alabama, so sometimes I'm not going to say the words in the right way, or I may make a comment sometimes that everyday people would understand. And of course, the last part is something that we as Christians never should be engaged in, because again, it becomes where we get our curse words and things along this line. Now, in the Greek, you had the classical Greek, where the word sometimes would be used in a certain specific way, and then you'd have the Koine Greek, which is the language of the common man. So always keep that in mind. What we are studying, and the Bible, by the way, was written in Koine Greek. That would be the language of the common man. So anybody could pick it up, read it, and understand what was being said in that respect. We talked again about the Greek, the smooth and the rough breathing mark. Any word that begins with a vowel or a rho will begin with a breathing mark. And the rho will always have the rough breathing mark. All right. We talked very quickly about the various punctuations. And then we began talking about elision, crossus, coronus, and diaeresis. We talked about this. Now, in the exercises, as we went through that, what I want you to do is, and I emphasized this last night, I want you to go through the exercises, writing the word, saying the word lues. You transliterate it. Lues, luusen, lambanomen. You do exactly, and what you're doing is transliterating it, is writing it in English so that you can get exactly what's going to be involved there. Okay? All right. And then in the last part, you talk about the idea of the essentials in New Testament Greek. You actually write the words, you write them in syllables, you transliterate them, and then you give the interpretation. You give what the words mean. So ago, akuo, blepo, echo, luo, angelos, adelphos, doulos, karpos, logos. All right. Now, chapter 3, the verbs. This is where we're really beginning to get into the details with regards to translation. Let me just say this, and I didn't really emphasize this, so that's the reason why I'm going to give you both lessons from last night. Translation is hard sometimes because in a lot of situations we have to try to understand what the word actually means, and then what the word means in context. When we begin to talk about this idea of translation, and especially when we start talking about translations of the Bible, let me just emphasize some ideas as we begin to talk about this. There is the attitude of some where what we need to have is what we call a word-for-word translation. In other words, you get word for word from the Greek into the English. The problem with that is that sometimes there are Greek idioms and Greek sayings that the Greeks would have understood that would make no sense to us whatsoever. This is true of the Hebrew language as well. So sometimes if you actually got a word-for-word translation, it may not make sense to us. But we always want to follow and use a Bible, and you will always know this by picking up the first few pages of the Bible And looking at, and again, if you've got a very good Bible, it will talk about the translation ideas in what's going on here. For example, in my New King James Bible here, in the preface, you have the idea of what we call word for word or complete equivalence in translation. We talk about they talk about the style, the devotional quality, the New Testament text, the Old Testament text, and how, again, these things sometimes begin to be a problem. Some translations will come across, and as you read them, and as you read the prefacing words there, they will try to look for what they call the dynamic equivalence. The translators in those situations are trying to get thought for thought. The problem is with this. You have a word for word where if the translators are trying to give me the exact word for word as much as they possibly can, then at least then I will be able to pick up a Bible and know, because they have translated it that way, I will be able to pick up a Bible at that point in time and know that they're not interjecting their thoughts. If you're looking for a dynamic equivalent, if you're looking for a thought for thought, then what happens is they take what they think the person is saying, it goes through their process with all the different thoughts and all of their backgrounds, and then they write down what they think it means. The New International Version will say that it has a dynamic equivalent translation. And that's why, as you read this, that's why I kind of shy away from this. Another big part that, again, we have not spent a lot of time talking about, and again, me doing this will emphasize that even more about how this needs to happen. Another big part of translating also comes down to the use of the Greek text. Now, we are not going to get into the critical idea of the text. The King James Version and the New King James Version all go back to what we call the Textus Receptus. The Textus Receptus is where a group of men got together and they took every Greek text that they could find, compare it with the Latin translations, as well as any other translation at that time. They would take everything and then kind of combine it all together and say, okay, this is what we have as the Bible, and this is what they would try to translate from. The Textus Receptus would include some passages that are not found in some Greek text. For example, 1 John 5, verse 7, where he talks about the Spirit, the water, and the Word, and these three are one. In most of the translations, or excuse me, in a lot of the Greek texts, that is not found there. Acts 8, verse 37, where we find the Ethiopian eunuch confessing Jesus before Philip baptized him. In many of the Greek texts, that is not found there. So I want to emphasize this idea because a lot of the newer translations are not using the Greek text of the Textus Receptus. They go with the Westcott-Hort idea. Now, the Westcott-Hort idea is we're going to take the oldest Greek texts. We're going to take some of the oldest Greek texts that we can possibly lay our hands on, and we're going to say this is what the Bible was, because the idea is that a person, if they're copying the text, would hopefully try to find the oldest Greek text so that nothing would be left out. When you're trying to copy a book, and you're copying it word by word, writing it down, you're going to make mistakes. People are going to make mistakes. If somebody is reading it to you and you're writing it down and you misheard, if your hearing is not as what it needs to be, then you would write down what you thought was said rather than what was actually said. So they would take all of these Greek texts together. They would use and count the words and how many times the words was used. They would see any differences of maybe some words from all of these Greek texts, and then they would try to put together a Greek text on which to do that. Now, this becomes, as I said, and this becomes a bone of contention with a lot of people, in the fact that a lot of the newer translations, the New International Version, the English Standard Version, and some of these others, are using this, what we call the Westcott-Hort text. And again, this goes more into the idea of the Bible, how we got the Bible, and hopefully in the next couple of years, we will be adding a course to deal with that, how we got the Bible and the various ideas of translation. I just wanted to emphasize this to you in this part of it so that you can understand, and this is kind of a long explanation in this, so that you can understand why there are some discrepancies between one version and another version, why sometimes you would go in some Bibles and see, for example, that Mark chapter 6, verse 9 through 20 is put in footnote status, or as in the Revised Standard Version, literally left out of the Bible. And you will understand what's going on there. This class does not have the time to go into detail as to what, and deal with the textual criticism of all of that. But I want you to understand that as we're trying to translate from the Greek to the English, sometimes you will find that there will be different ideas or different translations that may make a difference in the meaning of the text. So what we are striving to do in this class is to take what we have and go for a word-for-word, literal translation to the very best of our ability. By doing that, that helps us to know what the Bible says. And when you read the text, then you will be able to understand this is what the Bible meant as we do this. Now, going on, and I went off on a tangent there, but again, maybe this will help you to understand a little bit more concerning this. Greek verbs, like every other language, has 5 things. They have tense, voice, mood or mode, the person, and the number, all right? So what we're going to try to do is always emphasize these things and emphasize these parts of it, all righty? So whenever you are looking in the book, if you're looking on page 11 of the book, you will see these words in the vocabulary. Let's say them. Ginosko. Ginosko, again, emphasize where the accent is found. That's right. Ginosko, I know. And this is one of the words that John uses all through the book of John, as well as the book of 1 John, as well as the word oida, which again is another word for knowledge. Grapho, which means I write. And again, we think about graphology, the study of writing. So think about that in that respect. I write. Didasko, I teach. Didasko, I teach. This word didasko, when we talk about it in the feminine form, didaskalia, could be translated doctrine or teaching. So in either way, that's something I teach. Didasko, I teach. Egero, egero, I raise up. I raise up. Thelo, thelo, a will or a wish. Thelo. Lambano, I take or I receive. And again, in some situations, depending on the context, it could mean even to destroy or take away. Lego, I say, I speak. Lego, I say, I speak. Pimpo, I send. Pimpo, I send. And then Pharaoh, I bear or I bring. Pharaoh, I bear or I bring. The Greek verb is the most important word in the sentence. I want to emphasize this. This is the key word in a Greek sentence. A lot of these words will go back to the Greek verb. So it's important that we really get in our minds the importance of the Greek word and what's involved with the Greek word. As I said a moment ago, it has tense, voice, mood, person, and number. Now, when we think about this idea, let's talk about each one of them in detail. The tense. In English, the basic quality of tense is time. But in Greek, 2 elements are brought out. The idea of time, of action, and the kind of action. Now, notice here the idea of the word action. So it's not just the time of the action took place, but it also talks about the kind of action in that respect. All right? If you're going back to the workbook on this, it says It's the quality of the verb which has to do in time. In Greek, however, there are two characteristics in the manner of action that must be considered: the time of the action and the kind of the action. All right? So we use this idea. Listen to this idea. Sophia sings. All right? So Sophia sings. That simply means she's singing right now, and that's all it is talking about it with the time. Sophia sings, she's singing. All right? Then you have the idea of Sophia is singing. Now, Sophia sings and Sophia is saying the same thing, is it not? Yes, it is. But now the idea is that it's present progressive. She's not only singing, but she is continuing to sing. So there is that idea as well. Now, when we start talking about tense in this present active indicative, you will understand that it's talking about the time of the action as well as the continuance of the action. In the Greek, the present tense suggests as well the emphasis upon the continuance of what is going on there. So it's important to understand and grasp that. There are three possibilities as to the time of action: the past, the present, or the future. As to the kind of action, it could possibly mean it's progressive, in other words, and continuing to go on. It could be undefined, or it could be perfected. Now, write the appropriate kind of action with its definition. Progressive action implies a continuation of the action. So in other words, as I said a moment ago, Sophia is singing. So the idea is that Sophia continues to sing and is continuing on that respect. Undefined action is usually expressed by the aorist tense. And the aorist tense, again, in our way of thinking, is usually the past tense. But it's undefined. It doesn't specify the kind of action. It just emphasizes this is there. And then the perfected action describes the action as having been completed with the results, not the action itself, but the results of the action when continuing into the present. All right? So, again, as you're going through the book, and again, going through the workbook, write this and emphasize this. Perfected action describes the action as having been completed with the result of the action continuing, with the result of the action, not the action itself, the result of the action continuing. The undefined action is expressed with the aorist tense and does not specify the kind of action. And the progressive action means a continuation of the action. Sophia sings, so she's doing it right now. Sophia is singing. She is singing right now and continues to sing. Okay? It's not perfected. It is actually progressive. Okay? So if you need to, that's part of the reason why I'm redoing this again. Rewind and listen to it again and try to get this in your mind as much as you possibly can. Secondly, you have the idea of the voice in Greek. Now, in English, we have the active voice and the passive voice. The active voice means that the subject is acting. So I'm sitting here at my desk giving you this, and I pick up this pen, okay? So I personally am acting. I am picking up this pen. I am moving this pen back and forth, all right? Passive voice means in some way or another, the subject is passive. They're just sitting there, and it's being acted upon. So as you, think about it in this way, as you are listening to the tape, you are doing something, but in another sense, you're just sitting and listening. So you're being acted upon. I'm acting upon you by teaching you via this mode of our communication. Okay? So we understand that. Tommy goes out to cut the grass. So I am acting. I am doing it myself. Tommy, Larissa's wife, Tommy, is in control of the remote on the TV. So I'm just sitting back watching the TV. I'm passive. I'm not doing anything whatsoever. My wife is changing the channel on the TV. Now, the Greek also had a middle voice. So you have the active, the passive and the middle voice. The middle voice is when the action returns to the subject. We'll look at this in a little bit more detail in verse or in lesson 11, but the action is returning upon the subject. Okay, so you have again the tense, the voice, now the mood. The mood is the aspect of the verb which shows the relation of the action to reality. Okay, the action of the voice to the reality. Mood tells us where the action is real or potential. In other words, it's about to be done. In the Greek, there is only one mood that demonstrates the reality of the action, and that is the indicative mood. The indicative is telling you what's going on. All right? The mood of the verb is in that respect. So the indicative mood tells us the presentation of the assertion or fact. That's all it is. The indicative mood always tells us the presentation or assertion of the fact. The subjunctive mood, and we will talk about a lot of these a little bit later on, but you'll see this in the thing, but I'll go ahead and tell you what they mean. So, and I've got them written down in my workbook, so you might jot these down as well. And the subjunctive mood is uncertain but probable. In other words, it's not like the indicative in the fact that it just gives the assertion, but instead it's something that is desirable or something that is wished for. The subjunctive mood sometimes we'll talk about of a wish or a hope that something would happen. All right? The reality of the action expressly stated is the indicative mood. The subjunctive of the action is I hope this is what happens. I hope that it rains tomorrow. Well, that's the subjunctive mood in the Greek. The optative mood, the speaker portrays an action as possible but not probable. The speaker will speak of the action as possible but not probable. In Romans 3 and 4, Paul will say, may it not be so. May it not be so. Well, that's the optative mood. In other words, it's possible but not probable. Don't let this happen. Don't let this happen. Okay? And then the imperative mood is the mood of the commands. It's the mood of the commands. It's the mood furthest from certainty because, again, if I give you a command, you may or may not do it. If I tell you to study Greek an hour a night, you may or may not do it. I could command all day long, but I may say it, I hope that you do it. That's subjunctive mood. It may say, well, it's possible but not probable. And with some of you, if I wanted to emphasize the idea, some of you may study for an hour a night, but some of you may not. So that would be the optative mood. But if I say, I command you to do this, and I'm going to ask on a test if you do this, then it's still going to be up to you. But again, whether you do it or not, I won't know if you do it or not. If, however, I was your boss and paying you on this, then I wouldn't pay you if it didn't get done. You see what I'm trying to say? So in this respect, we always keep that in mind. Then you have the person. And we spent a lot of time last night talking about first person, second person, third person. Okay. Now, going on in the workbook, you have the indicative mood is that mood which confirms the reality of the action from the perspective of the speaker. The subjunctive, optative, and imperative are three potential moods. All right. So just keep that in mind. Person is like I see, you see, he sees, she sees, it sees, we see, you see, plural, and they see. I, you, he, she, or it. And again, whenever we do this in English, we do it more often than not. We say it because we speak English all the time, but you have to think about it, making the plural nouns, you have to have plural verbs. So in the same respect, think about it in this respect. Now, whenever we use this, we use personal pronouns. I, he, she, or it, you, we, they. Those are personal pronouns. And in the English, we always would say those personal pronouns. In the Greek, the personal pronouns are part of the verb ending. So if you're looking on page 12 of your book, notice you have a Greek verb contains a stem and a personal pronoun ending. You do not need a subject pronoun as in English. To form the perfect active of luo, you attach the stem, lu, with a personal ending lo for the first person singular form. So if you see the word luo, that means I loose or I destroy. And you know automatically, simply because it has luo, you know that the first person personal pronoun will be included. So when you're writing the translation of this, you would say I loose or I destroy. You would know that simply by the word luo. There's no personal pronoun there. If you would use the word lues, then you would have you are loosing, you singular. Now, in the time of the King James Version, they would use personal pronouns like thee and thou and thou'st and dost, things along that line. The word thee would denote a single, in other words, it would denote a singular personal pronoun. So the translators of the King James Version, when they would see the word lues, they would say, thou art loosing, thou art loosing. Again, it's indicative, so it's telling about the state of an action, and it's going on at that moment in time. Thou art loosing. We don't use thou today. So it's only a lot of times by the subject matter, we always use the word you or you, either second person personal pronoun singular or second person personal pronoun plural. Context makes the difference. Most of the newer translations today will translate it you. And we have to look at these contextual clues to be able to tell if it's talking about singular or personal. So, and it's not too hard for us to understand. It might get a little bit confusing sometimes, however, as we're trying to translate. Whenever I was being taught, I had to use thou and thee and you. So just understand that we're not going to do that because nowadays we don't use those terms anymore, and that's what's going on. Luo, I am loosing. Lues, you, singular, are loosing. Lue, he or she or it is loosing. He or she or it is loosing. Luomen, we are loosing. Plural, first person, plural pronoun. We are loosing. Luomen. Now again, you find that phrase at the end of the stem, luomen. Now you take these words that we've studied those so far. I go, I lead. So it's ago, ages, age, agomen, agate, agusen. Ago, ages, age, agomen, agate, agusen. All right? Akuo. Akuo, ukues, akue, akuomen, akuate, akuusen. So as you say that, then that's how you get it figured out in your mind. So I might ask you on a test, give me the word for they are listening. That would be akausen. Excuse me, akuusen, akuusen. Blepo, I see. Blepo, blepes, blepe. Blepomen, blepete, blepusi. Agaro, I raise up. Agaro, I raise up. Agaro, agares, agare. Agaromen, agarote, again, this gets fun. Agarumen, agarusi, okay? Agarusi, all righty? Genosko, genoskomen, genoskate. Genoskes, genoske. So again, it all depends on that. So go through every one of these paradigms. Say the word. Genosko, genoskes, genoske, genoskomen, genoskate, genoskisi. Grapho, graphomen, okay? Grapho, graphes, graphe. Graphomen, graphete, graphusi. Lambano, lambanomen, I keep going to the second or the first person plural. Please forgive me. Lambano, lambanes, lambane, lambanomen, lambanate, lambunus, lambanusi. So that's how we do it. So as you go through this, I would encourage you to do this and get that all in your mind exactly how to do it. You look at the stem of the verbs, you put the endings on the verb depending on what it is, and So always emphasize what's going on in that respect. Now, as we continue to go through this, the verb stem will always remain constant or unchanged. Always remain constant or unchanged. Whenever you see the lexical form of the word, that's in its purest form, and it's always going to be luo, luace, luo, grapho, didasco, all the way down through there. So, he brings out in the workbook, and again, this is the syllabification rules. If the ultima has a short syllable, if the last vowel in the ultima has a short syllable, the antepenult will be accented. And if it is, it's always going to have the acute, because it's not going to be the circumflex and the grav cannot go back to the third. If the ultima has a long syllable, the penult, the second syllable from the end of the word, will be accented. Okay? All right. What is an infinitive? An infinitive is part verb, part noun. It has the tense in the voice acts like a verb, but it can function in the sentence as a noun. All right? So the ending of an infinitive is always a fixed form. It does not change. So you have the infinitive of luo is luane, to loose. That's it, to loose. So always keep that in mind. The verb stem of the verb remains constant or unchanged. The present stem, you remove the omega from the first person singular or lexical form, and then you put o, ace, a, omen, ete, usi. All right? The personal endings were connected to the stem by the variable vowels. So you have, for example, the omicron will be used before mu and nu, and the epsilon will be used before the other ending. So the primary active endings are o, ace, a, usen. So you have the variable vowel being used, and the personal endings have become inseparably contracted through the development of the Greek language. All right? O and usen have the connecting vowel omicron. Ace and a have the epsilon. So again, just learn these about the stems and you'll get this. All righty? There's no distinction between the second person singular and the second person plural in modern English, though in Greek these two are distinct. So later on, when we're actually translating sentences, I'm going to ask you specifically to tell me if this is a singular or a plural word in that particular context, okay? Because sometimes and the only way you will know that is by the endings of the word, all right? So what we asked you to do last night, and I've pretty well gone through everything, is do the exercise on page 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15 at the end of chapter 3. Pronounce all these words, practice them, practice them, practice them, practice them, practice them. And if you have the opportunity, an hour a night, you will sit down and write luo, luace, lue, luomen, luate, luusi. You would write genosko, genoskes, genoske, genoskomen, genoskete, genoskusi. You may think that I am becoming a taskmaster here. That's not the case. When I'm asking you to do this, I'm going to be doing this as well. And I'm also going to be trying to prepare for the next class, so I'm going to be spending a little bit more time on this. I feel like as I'm teaching that sometimes I'm over my head in this because it's been a while since I taught that, so I've got to spend at least 2 hours a night getting ready for this class. I'm not going to ask that much more of you, okay? I appreciate your work. I appreciate your efforts. I appreciate all that you do. Keep up the good work, and we will begin again next Thursday night talking about New Testament Greek. We will go over chapter 3 and all of that, and then pick up with lesson 4, and we will continue from there. Thank you, and keep on studying. God bless you.